Okay, so welcome back to the third part of the 2D transformation tutorial within this larger CSS series. In the last part we looked at rotating an element and we spoke about content around it, so we covered just about everything about transformations. We used degrees. We established that we could use radians as well, but we stuck to degrees for simplicity. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to continue to talk about transformations, but I'm going to talk about transform origin. Now, this does apply to every other transform function that we're going to look at, so bear this in mind. But it's better explained with the rotation. Now, let's go ahead and just get rid of our paragraph. We don't need that anymore. And let's go back to our primary.css file. Now, let's go ahead and just say rotate this at 0 still. We'll take a look at how we write the transform origin property, and then we'll look at some of the values that we can give this. And we'll do that within the browser. We're not going to be doing this within the style sheet, just because we're going to waste time. So, WebKit transform origin. Now we can choose some values. So by default this is central. In the last part of the tutorial I briefly mentioned where the transform origin is by default, and that's the same as when you would say set a background image and you'd position a background image. Everything is in the very center of this element. So the transform happens and it rotates around the center point. Now we can modify this, and this can be useful in cases where you want more control over how things are rotated, and it also avoids the need to position elements, specifically to rotate them. So for example, if I wanted the rotation to happen from the bottom right hand corner, I could simply say bottom right. What I can also do is specify things like percentages. It's essentially the same as if you were, say, setting a background image. If you were placing a background image in an element, you can say something like 50%, and that will center it 50% from the left and 50% from the top. And this transform origin works more or less the same way, as do other positioning, as does other positioning in CSS. So I'm going to say right bottom, and let's take a look at how this affects it. Well, nothing's rotated at the moment, so let's go ahead and modify this value in Chrome Element Inspector. I'm going to choose 10 degrees. Now you'll notice that we're rotating slightly differently, very much differently than we did in the first part of the tutorial, in the sense that it's rotating around the bottom right hand corner because we've set this to right bottom, bottom right. So we can again change this, as I said, to something like 50%. This would not achieve much difference. We're rotating around the central point. This is the default property for this, or this default value for this property. We could do things like left or top left. And again, we can use our up and down arrow keys to rotate this around the top left. So now you can see that we have a lot better control over how we rotate this. Just to mention again, we can use pixels as well. So 100 pixels by 50 pixels. Let's go ahead and do that. You can see it's rotating 100 pixels from the top, I believe. Let's think, top. Yeah, 100 pixels from the top, and 50 pixels from the left. Oh no, the other way around, I think. Play around with it anyway. It's a good thing to be able to play around with it in the browser. It's something that is really going to help you out. Anyway, that's the transform origin, and as I said, it applies to the other functions that we're going to speak about as well. But it's particularly well demonstrated with the rotate function. So let's go ahead and look at translate next. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And we want to go ahead, and I'm going to get rid of transform origin, and I'm going to get rid of rotate here. However, remember, I'm still keeping this because we're just going to be passing a different function into this WebKit transform property. So translate, well, what does it do? Let's take a look, give it a couple of values, and we'll see how it changes our element. So translate, we pass in an X and a Y value. So let's go ahead and just do something like 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And let's go ahead and refresh. and you'll see it has moved. Now, this is odd, because you might think, well, what's the use in that? We could just use positioning. We could position this 100 pixels from the top, or 100 pixels from the left, or something like that. Well, the difference is that the element appears to have moved, but hasn't actually moved. We're essentially applying a transformation that doesn't affect any of the elements around it. Let's go ahead and put that paragraph in again and see how this affects. So this is a paragraph, and let's refresh. Now you can see that the paragraph is appearing under where the header would actually normally appear. So let's go ahead and just untick this. You can see that the paragraph now falls underneath where the header would normally sit. Now, the beauty of the translate function is it doesn't actually affect the paragraph at all, as with the rotate function when we looked at that earlier. So we could say we want it to be 10 pixels, 10 pixels. You can see it's slightly moved out, but the paragraph hasn't been moved down. The paragraph, isn't wrapping around it. It's essentially the paragraph is staying where it would be, as if the header had not moved. So we are moving this element without, actually moving it physically. It just appears to have moved. So that's the benefit of using the translate function. Okay, so we've looked at translate. Let's go ahead and look at something slightly more interesting, and that is skew. I'm going to leave this paragraph here just for the sake of it. Let's go ahead and get rid of the translate function, and let's go ahead and use skew. Now, if you have used any image editing software, including that one that you get installed with your computer, you'll know that it does have a skew function. You can pass values and skew an image, and this is essentially rotating an image but on a particular axis. So for example, we might say we want to skew this 10 degrees. Let's go ahead and look at the result of this. You can see that this has been skewed, and it's just this has been sort of bent over slightly, so it's maintaining its positioning, or maintaining its one side hasn't been pushed over further than the other. But the best way to demonstrate this is again through the browser. It's a transformation, so we'd waste time if we were to constantly update values in our file. Let me go ahead and press my up key, and you can see how this skews along like this. You can already tell that you'd be able to get some quite nice effects with this. You can pass a second value as well. Again, we can pass two values to this, so I might say 50 degree and 10 degree. You can see that I can sort of move this around. It's pretty neat. So we can do this as well. That will actually mirror the image. If we have a look, if we increase this as well, you can see it's mirrored the text as well. So look, you can see that we've got the ability to change a lot of stuff here, and if we play around with this enough, we can actually create some really good effects with this as well. So that is skew. It's relatively straightforward. Let's go ahead and try and pass say a pixel to this, so 10 pixels by 10 pixels. You'll notice that it hasn't worked. The reason being is that skew does work on rotation, so you might be tempted to say skew 10 pixels to the left or the right. It doesn't work like that. It has to be a degree value. Yeah, there we go. So we've got a degree value there, and again, play around with this in the browser. It's a lot easier to grab the effect that you need. Okay, so we've taken a look at a couple more. I'm going to stop the video there, and we're going to take a look at the last two things in the next part of the video. But for now, that is the skew function. We've taken a look at translate and transform origin as well. And in the next part, we'll be looking at scaling and then applying multiple transformations.